I call the member for Newtown.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to make a contribution to the debate on the Biodiversity Conservation Bill 2016 and Local Land Services Amendment Bill 2016, and acknowledge that the member for Ballina, my Greens colleague in this place, has already spoken at length on behalf of the Greens, highlighting our serious concerns with this bill, and that my Greens colleagues in the other place, including the Dr Maureen Faruqi and my colleague Greens MLC Jeremy Buckingham, as well as others, also raised their concerns about this bill in the early hours of the morning when it passed through the other place. It was in the other place that my Greens colleague Dr Maureen Faruqi raised serious concerns and expressed, and I quote her, the concerns that this involves a massive expansion of land clearing, the release of millions of tonnes of greenhouse gases adding to the climate change emergency, and acceleration in the loss of already threatened species in this state. And I note that the member for Cootamundra, who just spoke then about the discussion that happened at a school she was speaking at, talking about whether or not city members of parliament get to vote on legislation relating to regional areas, and similarly whether regional members get to vote on those relating to the city. And I would say that it is important that we all do get to have a say, because actually what is in the interests of this state of New South Wales, and indeed the people and the environment that is part of and make up New South Wales, is actually in the interests of all of us. And so when this government chooses to spend $16.8 billion on a polluting WestConnex motorway in the city that impact on the area that I represent, that is money from the roads budget that is not going to deal with black spots in regional areas and dealing with roads that are much needing of that budget, unlike the need for it in our area. And most similarly, when we are talking about land clearing and the destruction of our environment in regional areas, it is people in the electorate of Newtown who have a grave concern about the protection of our environment that also have an interest in that. And it is incumbent on all of us in this place to look at what is in the interests of all people and all communities in New South Wales, and to protect our communities and our environment. And that is something that we must do across this parliament, and it is unfortunately something that we are not seeing in this bill here today. Because as we see, the Local Land Services Amendment Bill 2016 abolishes the Native Vegetation Act 2003 and establishes a replacement native vegetation management system for private land, which makes land clearing easier, some even without approvals. The Biodiversity Conservation Bill 2016 abolishes the Threatened Species Conservation Act 1995, the Nature Conservation Trust Act 2001, and the Plants and Animals provisions in the National Parks and Wildlife Act 1979, and remakes these elements into the new Act. It will expand biodiversity offsetting, change the way threatened species are managed, and manage interactions between plants and animals. Both are inferior to the current laws and systems, which should be further strengthened and better resourced and implemented. I think it is pretty clear when we see from this Baird Liberal National Government any bill in this House that seeks to abolish, even on the words alone, abolish the Threatened Species Conservation Act and abolish the Nature Conservation Trust Act, that really we should be concerned. Because what we know and what we have seen is basically that this Baird Liberal National Government is engaging basically on a war on trees, on a war on the environment, and a war on green space. But more of that in a minute, because I think that it is important for us to note that in these changes that are called the Biodiversity Conservation Bill and the Local Land Services Amendment Bill, what we are seeing is that there is no mention of climate change or the impacts of biodiversity on climate change, and nor are we seeing any discussion of the impacts that land clearing will have and on exacerbating climate change. Just yesterday in this place we had a visit from women from Kiribati, women who are involved in the Kiribati Climate Action Network, and I acknowledge that the member for Summerhill was the one who hosted them in this place and brought members from across the political spectrum to hear their story. Those young women were in tears as they shared their personal story, and if you wanted to see the real and personal impact of climate change, of new coal mines, of dirty, polluting coal mines, of land clearing, of failing to act in relation to climate change, then you need to look no further than the personal impact it is having on the lives of those women and their families. We know, and it is clear from what Mike Baird is doing across this state, that he is not convinced of the need to protect our environment, and he is, for some bizarre reason, engaging in a widespread war on trees. He is bulldozing. He's bulldozing trees at a rate that is unbelievable, even in our city areas. We are seeing the destruction of natural environments. We've seen 100-year-old figs being destroyed along Anzac Parade, and I note the speaker sitting in the chair is aware, no doubt his constituency is completely aware of the concerns that the community in our city have against the light rail, which is destroying trees along its route. It should not be able to be destroying trees. Just this week we saw the Langton Clinic fig tree being destroyed as a result of the light rail route. It was not needed to be destroyed. The City of Sydney had a plan, but this government does not listen. They just bulldoze trees. They destroyed the last remnants of the Cooks River ironbark forest, a critically endangered ecological community, not for a piece of critical infrastructure. Don't get me wrong, this is not needed for WestConnex. They did it just to build a temporary work site to make the construction of WestConnex easier. Let's just say that again. They destroyed a critically endangered ecological community in the Cooks River ironbark forest, not to build WestConnex, just to put a temporary work site in there to be able to build WestConnex. This is a piece of endangered forest that was so important that actually the previous construction was built to build around it. This is outrageous. And I want everyone to understand that this level of critically endangered ecological forest is not something that can be replaced. These ancient trees and these ecosystems are literally irreplaceable. Once genetic material from an ecologically endangered community is gone, it is gone forever. You cannot go down to your local nursery and buy a plant and plant a few more trees in some other area to somehow match the loss that was affected there. Most plants bought from a commercial nursery come from a very limited genetic pool. A commercial horticulture, in commercial horticulture, thousands of plants are grown from a single parent plant and all have identical genetic makeup. In contrast, wild ecosystems depend on a complex and varied interplay of genetic variation and adaptation to a local area. Ironbark trees from the banks of the Cooks River are perfectly adapted to that environment. They are completely different in nature to the ironbark trees you might buy at a nursery. Diversity in our ecosystems is what will allow them to be resilient to the changing climate. And yes, that is why the concept of biodiversity offsets are a completely flawed concept. You cannot replace one biodiverse area with another. Nothing will bring back the Cooks River ironbark forest. Those plants and animals are gone forever, and the Baird Liberal National Government, I should say, have demonstrated that they cannot grasp why biodiversity is important, because they got rid of the ironbark forest at the Cooks River for a temporary WestConnex construction site. That is disgusting. That is disgraceful, and it is an important reminder to the Baird Liberal National Government that this land that you are attempting to clear, these environments that you are destroying, are not yours to destroy. No one owns them, and they are not yours to destroy. That is why the Greens oppose this bill. We oppose so much about this bill, and I'd like to particularly acknowledge the constituents from the electorate of Newtown that I represent, and the many thousands of people that made submissions to this consultation process that was a joke. The thousands and thousands of people that said that they wanted stronger protections, but instead what we see is an incredibly weakening. And whether it was Karen in Stanmore who said I would be deeply alarmed if the state was to follow the path taken by Queensland, or whether it was James from Newtown who said I'm worn down by the present situation facing this civilised nation, OMG, and now they want to facilitate the blanket destruction of swathes of habitat of native fauna and flora. Or Patricia from Surrey Hills, or Ellen from Stanmore, they all expressed their deep concern about the reality of what this Baird Liberal National Government is doing. This is not something that can ever be replaced. What we are doing now is destroying our earth, and it is shameful and despicable.